Hello and welcome to another episode of the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Itamar Blauer. Today, I'm joined with Dawn Anderson, who's an SEO consultant and the founder of Bertie. Dawn, good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here with you and your guests.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. And today's a really interesting topic that I think will have a lot of people intrigued in terms of especially what you have to say, Dawn, around the topic of debunking AI SEO myths, because I feel like we're not at the point where we're super early on where no one's really got a clue. So there has been some time that's gone past. And I wonder from your perspective, because at least from what I hear in my circles or online reading things, there sometimes seems to be certain types of narratives or things that people are talking about when it comes to AI SEO, but actually they're not true fundamentally. And sometimes it's a bit sort of, you know, that feeling where you kind of know something's been said isn't right, but you're trying to be a bit delicate about it because you don't want to just outright make people feel silly.
Yeah.
But what sort of viewpoint do you have in terms of AI SEO myths, or what sort of stands out from sort of what you've been noticing?
Well, quite a lot of things. I spotted something interesting, funnily enough, just over the weekend, based on the Google Search Central event that was on in Toronto just a few days ago, where Danny Sullivan had touched on the topic of commodity versus non-commodity content. And that seemed to draw a huge amount of conversation. And I think it was John Christoph, I can't remember his second name. He's a really smart guy. Anyway, he'd done a really good write-up on the whole event. And he then went on to share lots and lots of different people's perspectives on what non-commodity versus commodity meant. And when I looked in the roundup of all these opinions, they were all just totally different. And that's the challenge we've got at the moment. Nobody really knows. Nothing's really grounded in literature as such. Whereas to some extent with SEO, with crawling, with indexing, etc., a lot of it in the past, you can go through anything in IR and realize that much of it is actually grounded in academia. With this, we are in such an early stage that people are just guessing, lots of opinions flying around, not much to support any of them other than the fact that people are known to be thought leaders. So there's a lot of that going on at the minute, just lots and lots of opinions, and over time I think that we'll find evidence to support one opinion or the other. There was something interesting this morning that was also on LinkedIn. I really don't like LinkedIn, but sometimes I spot good morsels on there. It was a study actually that had been done by Botify, I think, that showed that actually OpenAI has doubled its crawling of the web. So that just goes to show that in actual fact, SEO is not going away anytime soon. The web is a massive now supporter of the grounding of large language models. So we've still got a job for the future, but at the same time, just it's a bit of a AI misinformation superhighway at the minute.
Yeah, and I feel like if we try and even analyze the sort of root cause before we jump into maybe like the biggest myths that exist at the moment, the root cause of why this may be happening in the first place is, like you mentioned, sort of the thought leadership aspect. Something that I've noticed personally is on Twitter, for example, which is a very interesting platform. And what I've seen lately, and even for the past few months, is you'll have some people who will create these threads about SEO in the context of AI and how you sort of win quote unquote SEO. And you sort
Mm.
of see by the framing, and a lot of the instances that I've seen is people who are not or haven't been in the SEO industry at
Yeah.
all. And they sort of like come up with these threads that look really cool, really sexy. And you can see that they've got lots of engagement on these posts. And a lot of what they will say is incorrect or doesn't abide by traditional sort of search practices or things that make sense traditionally. And an example that I have seen a lot is to do with schema, for example. And they were saying that LLMs or AI search, you need schema for yourself to be cited more, or and these things. But then I assume, and this is my assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not sure this applies to everyone, but a lot of people who will create these sorts of content online are people who haven't actually understood the foundations of what LLMs do. They don't understand tokenization. They don't understand the way that these machines interpret and essentially find meaning when inputs are being added in. And then if they would have, then they would realize that actually it doesn't make sense for something like schema markup to be read in sort of a literal sense. So that's sort of a lot of what I've seen, and I think that that sort of plays a part in terms of maybe why there's a lot more sort of myths out there or misinformation out there around our such. What's your take on that?
Well, I have a slightly different view on the schema side of things. Yeah. Um, in that, for me, we know that LLMs obviously don't just extract schema as such, because they can't in the same way as search engines have. My view is that LLMs use many other sources outside of the web to build the closed model, the closed book, if you like. And I believe that the addition of schema in other places and the semantic connectedness that is available through schema is already built in there elsewhere. So it's built into, if you like, the closed book model. And also I believe that the schema hints that are already implemented in normal search they're part of RAG. Yeah. So the RAG element gets pulled in as with all the, because obviously with LLMs, if you like, they are so open to abuse. They're literally just predicting next word. This is just a guessing game. So for me, the schema that is already baked into disambiguation of search would help them to be grounded more, if that makes sense. So apart from the fact that they don't extract it from content themselves, it's all the many other places and the knowledge bases, for instance, that they might use. For instance, you could end up in DBpedia, or you could end up in Wikidata with schema. So it's outside of normal search. I think that's part of our challenge as well. A lot of the time we're thinking always in the SEO mindset rather than the hybrid mindset. So, but again, that's just my opinion, So,
But you
yeah,
see, at least within this sort of explanation, you do provide a lot more context and examples within that. And
100%
whereas
do it. Yeah, exactly.
and what we see now is just so many blanket statements, which I think is quite dangerous,
Yeah,
especially when it's from people who might be influencers in certain types of platforms where a lot of people won't necessarily question things. And I think that's on the whole something that's come to be a bit
yeah,
more normalized in society, especially with AI, because you think, well, let's just assume a normal person or an average person would say, okay, AI, the name intelligence is in the name AI, therefore it must be this, you know,
yeah,
all knowing type of
yeah,
system, and you
mhm,
can trust anything that it says.
yeah,
So, when it comes into that aspect, I can see why it's a bit dangerous for people. But let's jump into specific types of AI SEO myths that you've come across or things that you've seen lately or in general that you think, let's set the record straight. This is a myth. What
yeah.
what are these?
Well, I mean, there's this whole debate again about LLMs.txt, which seems to like it won't die. Um, there is now in this case a lot of evidence that no AI bots or no major platform is actually bothering with LLMs.txt. And just in case the audience isn't aware of what that is, it just basically somebody set up a protocol and claims that it will be an alternative for AI bots, comparative, if you like, with robots.txt. So for that to work, you'd have to have the vast majority of platforms like the robots.txt is a well established internet engineering task force accepted. Request for consideration has been approved and it's part of the web. LLMs.txt to just throw it out there and say, hey, everybody's going to accept this. You'd have to have the major platforms on board, and you'd have to make a massive case for it. There's a process for these things, um, so I think there's been quite a lot of studies that just shows that actually no bots go near it. They don't care for it, but you've even got platforms now that are adding it as a black black mark if you don't. Oh, you haven't got an LLMs.txt. This is in the audit. It's just ridiculous. Um, and I think it's very irresponsible as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I would agree with you that that's probably the most notorious type of sort of thing that's come out with AI search, and it was quite early on. I think it was very soon after LLMs became sort of like
yeah,
mainstream or widely used, at least within the marketing community. And I completely agree. I think that it is irresponsible for things that haven't been proven to then become some kind of requirement or part of checklists or ways for people to audit companies. Because at the end of the day, if you're misinforming users or giving them sort of like full sense of security, or the opposite, if they don't have these things added to the root of their website directories, then that's a problem. So I do agree with you. I think LLMs.txt is a massive one, and it still gets, even to this day, there's still people who argue for it, which I think is fascinating, because I wonder what the motives are. And I think something else that I've noticed as well, I'd like to get your take on this, was when people were sort of saying you're going to need either markdown files on your site or
yeah.
particular pages that's just summarizing everything, or everything that you want LLMs to know about your site, and you sort of allow those from being crawled by training crawlers for these AI platforms, but you'll block maybe Googlebot or other types of user agents. What's your sort of take on this one? Because I've also heard
Well,
that quite a lot.
yeah, the markdown file. So I believe even a well-known. I'm not going to say names of these platforms because I think the challenge is a lot of the platforms that are out there now are actually adding to the problem. But there's a massive CDN platform that are offering to turn every page of your website into, well, create a markdown version, almost like the old AMP that was effectively creating a second page. So effectively you've got your normal HTML and then you've got your markdown version specifically for LLMs. Well, search engines and bots generally can parse HTML quite well. There's no need for an additional file. And in actual fact, you're doubling the size of your site. If you've got a massive site in the first place, then that's double the crawl budget that you're going to need. So again, not called for. Um, really not necessary. I think a lot of these platforms are jumping on a bandwagon half of the time, struggling to like just be relevant in all of these conversations. So yeah, again, unnecessary hyperbole.
Yeah, that's another tricky one, because I agree with you, and I think that again it all comes down to trust. Because let's say you're a customer of a massive a massive company provider for something, and then they sort of come out with something, and this has also happened within the SEO industry, right? With certain types of tools, and again I'm not naming names, but when these sorts of things become normalized and a sort of part of your I guess, brand, when it's sort of like your brand talking about these things, then it does really influence people. And I think people then try and do certain things which in reality are probably going to be a waste of their time. And that's not good, because if they're wasting their time, they're wasting their resources and money. And if you've got all of these different companies who are now trying to do something that isn't right. And then once they find out, or if they find out, they can become quite resentful. And then this is where you get even more problems, because then you're like, well, you've told me to do X, Y, Z, or you've done this for my site automatically, or you've tried to opt me into
Mhm.
doing something that's essentially useless. And that's a problem for me. And then there can be all sorts of other issues, maybe legal ones, that can sort of be
Mhm.
impacted by that. And
Yeah.
that's an issue. And I'm just trying to think of what other sort of things have been spread
Well,
lately. Yeah.
again, and sites just please CDN platforms just choosing to default block bots without making these things the default. Um, yes, people do need more education on AI bot crawling, because if you do look at any sample from a very very big site, the sorts of bots that are crawling, the AI bots are growing both in velocity, uh, i.e., cadence of revisits and so forth, but also in their number, in that there are more and more different AI bots emerging. And I know that Gary Esch, I can't remember where it was, but he said, I think it was last year, people really should get on board with analyzing server logs, because and controlling where bots crawl. But for a CDN, another well-known CDN, to just say, hey, we're gonna like block AI bots out of the box with new customers, that again is, again, it's not allowing people to have their agency, that to make their own decisions. So again, things that are all up in the air.
Yeah, and I guess then following on with that, because I imagine there'll be some other things that come out, and because AI is such a volatile space in the sense that things can crop out of nowhere, and the advancements of the tech is so fast and so vast, and things change very quickly. What are going to be, from your perspective, the best ways for people to not fall victim to AI SEO myths in the future? Or like, how do you think people should play their cards to give them the best chance of I don't want to say making the wrong moves, but also at least giving people a way to sort of educate themselves, or at least be able to experiment and test things, as opposed to being sort of all nuclear in terms of one option or one narrative?
Yeah, I think the challenge obviously is, I think it's about being critical, not just accepting the first opinion you see, or even a consensus, because we are seeing quite a lot of this, almost like these opinions that gather based on who somebody is a fan of in social media. These social media like um, influencer circles. So I think it's important that we, to some extent, take a broad perspective. Don't just jump into making decisions based on what somebody you follow says. Um, to some extent, or a large extent, take into consideration what Google says, whether or not somebody would call that Google fangirling or fanboying or whatever. Uh, their job is to speak to SEOs. I personally have yet to hear them say anything that didn't make sense, to be honest. So if they say there's no need for LLMs.txt, then I would probably take that as true. If there's any sense in them saying there's no need for Markdown, I'd probably take that as true. So I'd probably go with best practices. That doesn't mean you can't test things, but at the end of the day, if you have the budget and spare time to test things, then you're very lucky. I would just go with the fundamentals still. The fundamentals still work in search. Have a small amount of time for testing if you can. Be cynical, um, and very objective. That's what I would say. But also be constantly educating yourself as much as you can in all these different perspectives. And if something, as you say, has got a huge following on Twitter, and they've just appeared in SEO and never been in SEO before, and all of a sudden, they've got this stream with hundreds of likes, then the chances are it's probably, something that you don't want to jump on board with.
Sure. No, some good advice there. And just to sort of wrap things up for this one, are there any types of I know you mentioned sort of Google documentation or at least things that Google has said. Are there any other sources or things that you recommend or anyone who you can shout out that you trust in terms of, their content or their approach around AI SEO, just in terms of at least giving people maybe a way to get some different perspectives, or things
Mm.
like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of like following things that are going on in the information retrieval world rather than necessarily the SEO world. But I do feel, for instance, that Glenn Gabe does quite a good job of giving quite an objective perspective. Shares quite a lot of really interesting studies. Um, I think Aleda's sharing some different perspectives as well around measurement of AI SEO going forward. And again, I mean, Aleda's just very good for always sharing lots of people's good content. So she's a big champion of different perspectives and good work. So I think if you follow Aleda's stuff, then a lot of the time you'll get access to a wide range of views and good studies. But as I say, I like the stuff that Glenn's doing as well. Obviously, I always follow Barry Schwartz. Barry Schwartz again, very objective. Most people will probably be following his stuff already. Um, Search engine land, obviously all the obvious ones. Yeah, so but I would say follow the IR community as much as anything because they're always one step ahead of search or SEO as we know it, if you like.
Mhm. Amazing. Thank you so much. And Dawn, where can people find you if they wanna ask any questions or reach out?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I do frequent Twitter still. Not that there's that many of us there, but I do still frequent Twitter at Donny Ando. Blue Sky as well, Donny Ando, and LinkedIn. Probably LinkedIn is the easiest one to get hold of me on. Yeah. And obviously at my website, bertie.com.
Amazing. Dawn, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you everyone listening out there as well. And as always, we will see you in the next episode.